I time traveled and ended up as the wicked female supporting character in a story destined for a tragic end. Counting on my fingers, I quickly calculated I had transformed into a wealthy supporting character with enough money to last several lifetimes, and on top of that, I had a husband and a well-behaved son who seemed to have fallen from the sky. I made a decision right away. What kind of joke is this? With a life this good, why should I chase after the main leads to play the role of a villainess? The morning sunlight filtered through the gaps in the curtains and illuminated the room. I rubbed my eyes, and one thought crossed my mind. Why is my bed so soft today? Before I could think further, I suddenly noticed a dip beside me, where someone was lying. The other person was still breathing. I blinked twice, still unable to comprehend what was happening. At that moment, the person turned over, and I clearly saw their face. It was a man, and not just any man, but one so handsome it could make the heavens furious. He was a masterpiece of creation. All the beauty in the world seemed to have been poured into that face, even more beautiful than several famous stars. I touched the corner of my mouth, almost drooling. Suddenly, my consciousness returned. Why was this man lying in my bed? My body's reaction was faster than my brain. Without hesitation, I kicked him. I don't know if I didn't kick hard enough or what, but he only shifted a little to the side, not falling off the bed as I had hoped. I sat up, looked over, and gazed at the bed that was 3 meters wide, lost in thought. When did my bed get this big? Or am I still dreaming? Although he didn't fall to the ground, my kick had awakened him. His beautiful brows furrowed, clearly still very sleepy. When he saw me curled up in the farthest corner, wrapped in a blanket, his brows furrowed even more, and his thin lips pressed together. Victoria, what are you up to this time? I froze. Why did this handsome guy know my name? Why did it seem like we were very familiar with each other? If I knew a guy like him, would I ever forget? Of course not. But why did he know my name? I hesitated for a moment and asked, "Who are you?" The man was taken aback for a moment, then smirked. "Why are you asking? Are you going to pretend to have amnesia again today?" Victoria, I didn't expect your acting this time to be quite good. If it weren't for all the times you've tricked me before, I might have believed you this time. I was stunned. Could it be that I really had amnesia? Could it be that this handsome guy in front of me was actually my husband, but I had forgotten him due to memory loss? Seeing me silent, he scoffed. Still want to keep acting? Fine. I'm Alexander, your legal husband. Any more questions? It felt like a thunderbolt struck me. My mind exploded. Everything outside was burning, and inside I was on fire. My whole body numb. Alexander, Victoria, legal husband. I wasn't suffering from amnesia at all. This was clearly time travel. Why was I so sure? Because this was the novel I had just finished reading before going to bed last night. But how terrifying, or rather, how unfair for a delicate girl like me was. I didn't time travel as the main character. Instead, I had become the wicked female supporting character in the story. I forced out a couple of awkward laughs. No, it can't be. Seeing me in a daze, Alexander couldn't be bothered to say more, directly stepping over me to get out of bed and change clothes. I was still drowning in the sorrow of realizing I had become the wicked female supporting character in the story. My character had married her current husband, Alexander, due to a family arrangement, but shortly after the marriage, I fell in love with the male lead, Adrian, at first sight. So, I devised all sorts of tricks to get a divorce, and after the divorce, I frantically pursued Adrian like a lovesick moth drawn to a flame. But the male lead only had eyes for the female lead, Evelyn. This made me incredibly jealous. I kidnapped the female lead, created all sorts of misunderstandings, and in the end, after the misunderstandings between the male and female leads were resolved, I was ruthlessly pushed into the sea by the male lead to be fed to the sharks, ending my miserable life. I cried without tears. Why is it that others who travel through time have smooth sailing, whether they're the female lead or have a golden finger, while I, apart from knowing the tragic end of my life, have nothing else? Where is the system? Please don't tell me that when it's my turn, the system malfunctions. After Alexander finished getting ready, he still saw me sitting dazed on the bed. He frowned and asked, "Victoria, didn't you say you would go with me to the company today? Why are you still sitting there in a daze?" I looked up at him, my face downcast. "I'm not feeling well today, can I skip it?" He pursed his lips, seemingly used to my unpredictable moods, and replied in a cold tone, Suit yourself. After saying that, he turned and left. I lay back down on the bed. I must admit this mattress is really too comfortable. It feels like I'm sinking into it and sleepiness soon follows. No, I lightly slap my cheeks. My life is currently at stake, and what I need to do is think of a way to escape this book, ensuring my survival until the end. How could I possibly sleep? I absolutely cannot let myself be so lazy. When I opened my eyes again, the digital clock on the bedside showed 12:30. No, and I was still lying on that soft mattress. All right, clearly the idea of taking a nap and then returning is far too fanciful. My stomach began to growl, the hunger making it impossible for me to concentrate on anything else. I decided to eat first. You need to have food to sustain your spirit, so I must fill this hungry belly. After washing my face, I rummaged through the wardrobe for a comfortable sports outfit to wear, and finally stepped out of my spacious bedroom, the room I considered my home. Stepping out of the room, I realized this was just a small corner of this enormous house. I glanced around the house. The decor was luxurious yet understated, exuding the wealth of its owner. I silently envied the life of the rich. It truly makes one feel jealous, living alone in such a big house. Wouldn't that be scary? Madam, why are you standing here? A sudden voice from behind startled me, and I turned to see a man who appeared to be quite elderly looking at me with confusion. If I guessed correctly, he must be the butler of this house. I wonder if he would say the classic lines from those domineering CEO dramas. Madam, he called again, bringing me back to my senses. Oh, it's nothing. I just found this painting so beautiful. I wonder how much it costs. The corner of his mouth seemed to twitch slightly. Then he calmly replied, "This painting was painted by the madam herself. Its value is, of course, determined by the madam." Me? If I told him that I wasn't that self-absorbed, would he believe me? We fell into an awkward silence, and finally, I changed the subject. "Is lunch ready?" "I'm hungry," he nodded. "Lunch is ready. Would the madam like to go to the dining room now?" I nodded vigorously. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go right now." I followed him into the elevator down to the lower floor and wound through several hallways before finally reaching the dining room. As soon as I entered, a small figure by the dining table immediately caught my attention. It was a very cute little boy, with a delicate face and a cool demeanor, around 7 or 8 years old. His cheeks were chubby from being stuffed with food, making him look very adorable. Hearing the noise, Darmian looked up at me for a moment, and then lowered his head to continue eating. Just that one glance was enough to shock me to the core. 5. Darmian's eyes, nose, and eyebrows were just like Alexander's. Alexander's child. With whom exactly? Could it be with me? I frantically rummaged through my memories of the novel I had read last night. Did it mention that Alexander had a son? Not a word about it. How could a boy just suddenly appear? Could it really be my child? I had just time traveled, not even half a day ago, from a youthful girl to a woman who already has a child. Hey, why are you staring at me like that? Are you sick or something? Great, this kid definitely isn't my biological son. Finally, I let out a sigh of relief. I am still the beautiful, vibrant young girl. I frowned, stood up straight, crossed my arms, and looked at Darmian with a condescending expression. "Hasn't Alexander taught you to respect your elders?" Darmian scoffed with a mocking smile. "You consider yourself an elder?" I touched my cheek and mumbled, "That seems to be true. After all, I am still just a beautiful young girl." It seemed my words left Darmian speechless. He rolled his eyes and continued to eat his meal slowly. I sat down on the other side of the table, taking advantage of the moment when the butler went to fetch food for me. I glanced at Darmian a few more times. Although the story didn't mention Alexander having a child, in the end, both Alexander and I were merely supporting characters, only given a few lines to drive the plot forward. But now that I had stepped into the world of the story, it wasn't impossible for some details to differ from what I knew. However, Alexander really knew how to take care of his children. Every gesture and action of Darmian exuded elegance. Just like a European nobleman, Alexander, I couldn't help but look a few more times, my mind swirling with 100 thoughts. This child was both outstanding and adorable. How could a world-class mother like me not love him? It seemed Darmian could no longer tolerate it. He put down his spoon and looked at me with annoyance. "What are you staring at? What are you planning to do next? Well, at such a young age, he already has such unhealthy thoughts. I silently shook my head, but then I remembered that this character is originally someone who plays tricks, so I couldn't blame Darmian for being so guarded. After thinking for a moment, I decided to change the subject. Why didn't you go to school today? The little guy looked at me as if I were an idiot. It's summer vacation right now, I replied. Oh, what about your summer homework? Have you finished it all? How much did the school assign? I've done all of it. The boy finished the last piece of his eggplant, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and coldly glanced at me. I'm done eating. I'm going back to my room now. So I won't be in your way anymore. You don't need to try to find topics to talk to me about. After saying that, he left. I clicked my tongue. He truly is the child of Alexander, with a personality just like his. Not cute at all, but thinking about it, all of this was my own doing. Accepting that I had transmigrated into a wicked female supporting character was one thing. But why couldn't I have transmigrated right after the marriage? It really is exhausting, I sighed. Anyway, things had turned out this way, so I might as well go with the flow. A few days passed, and Alexander often came home in the early morning and went straight to his study to work. By the time he was home, I had already been on countless dates with a younger version of Victoria in my dreams, so we hardly saw each other. As for that little boy, he was probably intentionally avoiding me, so we rarely met, and even when we did, we hardly spoke. I lay on the super large rubber mattress, thinking for a long time, and finally came to a conclusion. If I wanted to live peacefully and build a relationship, I had to start with the little ones. After making up my mind, I went to Darmian's room, knocked on the door and peeked in. How about Alexander signs you up for a few extracurricular classes? Darmian looked rather annoyed. I really didn't understand. Weren't extracurricular classes supposed to be good? When I was young, I loved going to extracurricular classes the most, he said through gritted teeth. I already have too many subjects to study. I don't have time for anything else. I moved closer. What are you studying now? If you don't understand, you can ask me. You. Darmian shot me a glance, his eyes filled with disdain. Forget it. I'm afraid you don't know. My fighting spirit immediately flared up. How ridiculous. I graduated from a prestigious university, and I wouldn't know elementary school material. I leaned in closer, looking at commercial law, the distinction between employees and independent contractors. I fell silent. I didn't understand, really didn't understand. Do elementary school students study competitive commercial law? Did this boy prepare for the level 4 and 6 English exams while still in his mother's womb? He took the workbook from my hands, his tone dripping with mockery. I told you you don't know. I pointed at the workbook, trying to justify myself. This isn't about whether you know or not. It's about you. An elementary school student shouldn't be doing things that elementary school students shouldn't be doing. What's the point of learning this stuff? His gaze became even more derisive. You were the one who told me to study this stuff. Are you regretting it now? Afraid I'll inherit the Alexander company and kick you out on the street with nothing? I pointed at him, suddenly realizing a truth. It turns out that sometimes parents hitting their children isn't unreasonable. It really is deserved. You're an elementary school student. Can't you have a little simpler and carefree mindset? Besides, I should let him know that he and Alexander are legally married, and even if they were to divorce one day, his assets would still be partially mine. So leaving with nothing is completely impossible. Darmian scoffed. So you're not legally blind? I humbly replied. A talentless person only studies this part. Darmian. Ellipsis. I gently poked his cheek, and he immediately dodged, his big round eyes glaring at me. What are you doing? I smiled broadly at him. Deal? Let's call a truce, Victoria. Luckily, I caught a glimpse of the name on Darmian's workbook. Otherwise, it would have been embarrassing not to know it. What are you planning to do now? I pointed at him. I already told you not to speak to adults like that. You need to be polite. What are you planning to do now? I pointed at him. I already told you not to speak to adults like that. You need to be polite. Darmian was so angry that his eyes turned red. His chubby face puffed up with a childish pout as he glared at me. Seeing that, I just wanted to reach out and stroke that adorable face. As he looked around the room, he sighed in awe of the exquisite luxury. I continued. I'm serious. I'm not talking about the classes you're currently taking. but about things you're genuinely interested in. For example, singing, playing the piano, painting. You can choose whatever you like. We have plenty of money at home. Humph, not that it's my money. Anyway, Alexander would definitely not allow him to learn these things, but I have my ways. He just needs to say whether he wants to learn or not. Darmian clearly showed some hesitation, occasionally glancing at me, as if trying to figure out what I was scheming. I'm a beautiful young woman. What kind of bad intentions could I possibly have? I just want to be a mother without having to give birth. Who wouldn't want a big boy like this as a gift, without the hassle of childbirth? Thinking of this, I couldn't help but smile. I've made my decision. Victoria finally spoke up. He looked straight at me, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. I want to learn to paint. If you can really help me learn to paint, then I agree to a truce with you. I smiled broadly, giving him a thumbs up. Okay. That evening, Alexander had to work overtime. I sat on the sofa, with a high-end power bank, waiting for Alexander to return. I finally heard the sound of soft footsteps at 1 a.m. Alexander looked surprised to see me, but said nothing, just nodded. Great. So cool. So aloof. He really had the demeanor of a domineering CEO. I silently admired him and stepped forward to help him take off his suit jacket. By accident, my fingers brushed against his chest. He froze and I froze too. The feeling was amazing, but compared to Victoria's cheeks, it was still a bit lacking. Adrian, what are you up to this time? He frowned slightly. Tisk, it's just like asking the same question as his father. I raised an eyebrow and smiled knowingly, joking as I went to my room. What else? The butler is still here. If he says no, wouldn't I be embarrassed? Alexander raised an eyebrow and nodded slightly. All right, we went upstairs together to our rooms. As soon as I closed the door and turned around, I bumped straight into his chest, and his breath enveloped me. My heart started racing. Everyone, we often say that a beautiful single girl who has never dated stands before a domineering CEO in a white shirt and rolled-up sleeves. Who could resist that? I hurriedly covered my nose with one hand and pushed him away a little with the other. Stay away from me. I'm about to have a nosebleed. Alexander. Adrian, what are you doing? I struggled to suppress the urge for a nosebleed, took a few deep breaths, and finally spoke. I want to talk to you about Victoria. He looked a bit surprised. Victoria, today I went into the boy's room and found him studying commercial law. Did you arrange that? Yeah, you suggested it before. So if I say I've changed my mind, can he stop studying? What are you plotting? I just wanted to apply the principle of peaceful coexistence. What do you know? I don't have any ulterior motives. I just think it's too early for a boy in elementary school to be learning these things. The Gu family will hand over the company to him sooner or later. These are things he needs to learn. Look at you. I never said he shouldn't study. How about this? Sign him up for an art class. He can't just keep studying like this. Kids will end up dull. You seem particularly concerned about Victoria today. Why is that? He looked at me suspiciously. I chuckled coldly to myself. Haha. Why? So I can live peacefully with both of you, and not end up as shark bait later on, of course. Suddenly your conscience has awakened today, huh? So will you agree or not? He clicked his tongue. Let's sleep first. I blinked. So I'll take that as you agreeing, okay? He gave me a sidelong glance. Let's sleep first. Before I could say anything more, he moved closer, and kisses came pouring in. I was stunned. 1,000 horses galloping through my mind. Is this sleeping? Clearly, he wants to sleep with me. Does the domineering CEO have a misunderstanding about the word sleep? Even though I had prepared myself mentally after finding out I was married, the book clearly stated that Alexander and Victoria had no feelings for each other, right? Did I make a wrong step somewhere? I was kissed into a daze, and soon I had no thoughts left to ponder. The only thought in my head was, I am no longer a young, beautiful girl. Now I am a young, beautiful woman. Haha. The next day, when the alarm clock of Alexander went off, I was so exhausted that my eyelids felt like they were glued shut. In contrast, there was the bright-eyed demeanor of some domineering CEO. I really couldn't understand why he was the one full of energy, while I couldn't even get out of bed. Seeing that he was already dressed and ready to go, I mustered all my strength to say a few words. Class drawing? Vukang, let's do it later. I threw a pillow at him with all my might. After he had drained me of all my energy, he just said to do it later? Of course. Even if you gave me 10 times the courage, I wouldn't dare to say that out loud. Alexander shot me a glance, a light smile appearing in his charming eyes, but his tone remained arrogant. If he wants to learn, let him learn. That's how it should be. The first step of the relationship building plan was successfully completed. I was satisfied and went back to sleep. I slept straight through until noon. Even though I had enough rest, my whole body ached unbearably. Lying in bed, I silently cursed Alexander 800 meters. Only after I calmed down did I finally get up to wash my face and prepare for lunch. Ko Vu-kang had almost finished eating. When he saw me, the little guy looked surprised, hesitated for a moment, and then said, "Your neck." I instinctively covered my neck with my hand. Damn it. Sooner or later I'll have to kill that bastard Alexander. I forced a smile through gritted teeth. Just got bitten by a mosquito. You know I'm the type that attracts mosquitoes. The little guy mumbled in response. After all, he was just a child. A few sweet words would smooth things over. I sighed in relief and sat down at the dining table. I grinned widely at him. Alexander has agreed to let you take the drawing class. He nodded. I know. He told me this morning during breakfast. He told you already. I squinted, displeased. I wanted to be the one to tell him first. The little guy looked at me with a profound expression. If you really wanted to tell me first, I hope you can wake up a little earlier. Is it because you don't want to get up? I also want to be like those rich housewives, getting enough beauty sleep, waking up to elegant rosemary tea. But it's that Alexander who won't let me sleep. That said, the domineering CEO doesn't necessarily have to work through the night, but stretching it to 3 hours is no problem. He got home at 1 a.m., slept at 4 a.m., and woke up at 6 a.m. Does he really not fear sudden death? If he suddenly died, I wonder how much inheritance I would get. But I have to admit, the feeling of touching his chest is quite nice. What is Alexander thinking? Ko Vu-kang's voice pulled me out of my daydream. The little guy looked at me with a disgusted expression. What were you just thinking? Your saliva is about to drip. I wiped the corner of my mouth and shot him a glare. Adult matters. Kids shouldn't ask too much. He huffed. Suddenly, I remembered something and turned to ask, "So can we call a truce now?" Ko Vu-king pursed his lips, puffed out his cheeks, and nodded. Great. This little guy has been won over by me. At least when he grows up, he won't kick me out of the house. Now there's just the issue of the adults that I still don't know how to handle. Alexander is indeed a person with 800 meters of calculations in his head. I'm afraid if I miscalculate, I'll lose everything. Ko Vu-kang chewed carefully before swallowing the last bite, then hesitated for a moment before saying to me, "If you go outside, remember to use concealer to cover your neck. You're grown up now, it's too embarrassing." After saying that, the little guy walked away, still wearing a mischievous smile. I stood there, frozen. He's just in elementary school, right? He's still just a child, isn't he? Why does he know so much? Why was I exposed by a child about the marks on my neck? I couldn't help but blush and inwardly curse at Alexander nonstop. The butler approached, letting out a soft sigh. It's been a long time since the young master has been this cheerful. Although it's a bit different, he really did say something that a butler in a domineering CO novel would often X. I was extremely satisfied. On a beautiful sunny afternoon, since Alexander hadn't returned from working late last night, I had a good, sound sleep. Early in the morning, as I got up to have breakfast, the butler gently asked, "Miss, is there anything else you need?" Looking at the sumptuous breakfast spread on the table, I thought for a moment and replied with 8 parts pride and 3 parts elegance. "Then please get me another cup of black coffee." The butler acknowledged my request and went into the kitchen. I felt a thrill inside. This was the life of the rich that I had always dreamed of. Before long, a steaming cup of coffee was brought out. I took a sip and nearly spat it out. It was too bitter. It really wasn't easy to play the role of a sophisticated person. After finishing my body was drained of energy, and I collapsed onto the bed, falling asleep. When I woke up, the distinctive smell of antiseptic from the hospital hit my nose, startling me. Suddenly, I felt anxious. No way. Just when I'd managed to soothe the little one and was about to enjoy the life of a wealthy lady, I was pulled back to the old world. Before I could say anything, an angry voice rang out beside me. "You're awake?" I turned my head to see Alexander, his beautiful brows tightly knitted together, a small crease clearly visible between them. his charming eyes filled with suppressed anger. Tears immediately welled up in my eyes. Thank goodness. I was still here. I could still be a noble and elegant lady. Alexander seemed startled by my tears, his anger subsiding as he hurriedly asked, "What's wrong? Why are you crying? Are you uncomfortable? Should I call the doctor?" I shook my head. My voice choked. "I'm fine. I just feel that life is truly wonderful." Alexander. I sniffled and asked, "Why am I in the hospital? Wasn't I sleeping at home?" He scoffed coldly. "You weren't sleeping, you fainted." Before I could ask why, he continued, "You insisted on drinking coffee even though you can't handle it. Didn't you know you're caffeine intolerant?" I was taken aback. I really didn't know. If I had known, I wouldn't have touched it even if Alexander begged me. Caffeine intolerance? What a pretentious condition. Indeed, only someone like me could suffer from that. Does that mean I can't drink coffee anymore? Not necessarily. It depends on your health. The doctor said it might be because you've been drinking too much coffee lately and your body is overloaded. Perhaps after some time, you can drink it again. I felt a bit disheartened. It seemed my dream of enjoying elegant afternoon teas with coffee, and Alexander noticed my lack of spirit and changed the subject. "In a few days, the Faux family will hold a charity auction. Do you want to go with me?" "An auction?" My eyes lit up. "Isn't that where the wealthy compete against each other, bidding exorbitantly as if money were no object?" I eagerly nodded. "Of course." He smiled lightly, his voice suddenly warm. "All right. Then you need to take good care of yourself in the coming days." I raised my arm, the one not hooked up to N4, to show off my completely weak bicep. "I'm fine now." He looked at me for a moment, then unexpectedly leaned in close, whispering softly in my ear. "If you're fine now, how about going home to sleep?" He deliberately emphasized the word sleep, and my face immediately turned bright red. I pushed him away and said seriously, "I think I need to stay on for another 2 days to regain my strength." He let out a slight sound of regret. "Well, that's fine too." I burrowed under the blanket. At least in the hospital, I could sleep soundly. Recently, I had been pondering a very profound question. Everything happening now was completely different from the content of the novel I had read. Although Alexander was not described much in the book, the relationship between Victoria and Alexander was clearly not good at all. So, who could explain to me why Alexander clung to me every day? Had he been possessed by someone? One exhausting morning, as he buttoned his shirt, revealing his 8-pack abs and the alluring line of his physique, Alexander turned to look at me. "Sleep a little longer. Someone will come to the house to help you with your makeup at noon. Tonight, I'll pick you up to attend the charity auction hosted by the Fu family." I mumbled a response. It wasn't until he left that I suddenly realized. Which family? The Fu family. I chuckled awkwardly. Could it be the Fu family I'm thinking of? Everything was ready, and I slipped into the emerald green evening gown that Alexander had prepared for me. Presenting myself before him, his astonished gaze filled me with satisfaction, and I instinctively stood a little straighter. To be honest, when I looked in the mirror, I was also surprised by myself. Indeed, beauty shines brighter with the right attire. This dress truly enhanced my looks. Alexander stood up from the sofa, walked over to me, and placed my hand on his arm. "Let's go." The tenderness in his eyes made it easy for anyone to get lost in them, and my heart involuntarily raced a few beats faster. Indeed, no woman can escape the allure of a domineering CEO. I couldn't help but admit to myself that I was genuinely moved by Alexander's appearance. The car glided smoothly. After what felt like a long time, it finally came to a stop. Alexander got out first, placing his hand between my head and the roof of the car, waiting for me to step down before leading me to meet 2 people standing at the door. The man was tall and strong, while the woman wore a gentle, charming smile. Suddenly, I felt in my heart that they were the leading couple from a story. Alexander shook hands with the man and then pulled me close to him, introducing, "This is my wife, Victoria." The man nodded slightly and introduced in return, "I've heard Alexander mention you for a long time. It's great to finally meet. This is my wife, Evelyn." My brain immediately went blank. These 2 are married. No way. According to the time I traveled to, I shouldn't have met Adrian yet. And Adrian shouldn't have met Evelyn either. It's been less than a month since I crossed over, and not only are they in love, but they're already married. Alexander noticed my expression seemed off, leaned in close to my ear and softly asked, "Are you okay?" I snapped back to reality and shook my head. "I'm fine, I just got a bit carsick." He smiled at the other two. "Sorry, my wife doesn't go out much, so her body is a bit weak." Adrian smiled back. "It's because we've been standing here talking for too long. You two should go inside. The auction is about to start." Alexander led me to the seats arranged in the hall. He placed his hand on my forehead, his eyes filled with concern. "Your complexion hasn't been great. What's wrong? But you don't seem to have a fever." I tugged at his sleeve and asked, "How long have Adrian and Evelyn been married?" Alexander thought for a moment before answering, "About a year." I heard this auction is organized by Adrian to celebrate Evelyn's birthday. My heart felt like it was struck by lightning. Now, I understood where the strange feeling I had been experiencing came from. I hadn't crossed into the story I had read. Alexander saw my face turn a bit paler, his gaze even more worried. "What's wrong? Are you feeling unwell? Should we head back?" I shook my head, trying to force a smile. "I'm really fine, just a little carsick. I'll be okay after resting a bit." He seemed half convinced. Suddenly, he moved a bit closer to me. I looked up at him in confusion. He seemed a bit awkward, his gaze drifting elsewhere. "If you're not feeling well, don't force it. Lean on my shoulder and rest for a bit." The domineering CEO was indeed a domineering CEO. Even when feeling shy, he looked this handsome. My heart raced. I gently rested my head on his shoulder. Now that I had figured things out, it was still the same saying. Since I was here, I might as well live peacefully, although my final talisman of knowing the story's developments had left me. Generally speaking, no matter how tragic my ending might be, it wouldn't be to the extent of being thrown into the sea as shark bait, right? Thinking this, I felt a bit more at ease. When the soldiers come, the generals eat. When the water comes, the land blocks. If it doesn't work out, I just need to bribe Kovu King a bit more, and who knows? One day the scoundrel Alexander might bring back a female lead, and Kovu King, remembering the feelings I had for that kid, might give me a large sum of money to spend. At that point, I would become a wealthy boss, and I could find fresh meat whenever I wanted. Just thinking about this made the corners of my mouth involuntarily lift. Once I get home, I'll immediately try to win Kovu King over. Alexander was still paying attention to my expression. Seeing me smile foolishly, he finally couldn't help but ask, "What are you laughing at? Are you thinking about fresh meat?" As soon as the words left his mouth, I realized I had slipped up. Sure enough, the atmosphere around us suddenly dropped a few degrees. Alexander's face darkened, pulling me into his embrace. He asked in a deep, husky voice, "You want to find fresh meat? What? Am I not enough for you?" As someone who loves deep voices, I was captivated by his husky tone, but my survival instincts kicked in, and I shook my head frantically. No, I was just joking. Don't take it seriously." He smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant one. "Just wait until we get home." Those few short words were full of power. I hugged my face, crying without tears. I wouldn't sleep well tonight. The auction began. Most of the items were antiques and calligraphy that the wealthy kept carefully. I didn't understand any of it, just focused on listening to the bids, and after a few rounds, I could only silently marvel. I gradually felt less interested. Bored, I kept yawning. After a long wait, we finally reached the end of the auction. The host, holding the microphone, spoke with great enthusiasm. "Next up is the final item of this auction, and also the most important, the Tear of the Sky." Two people pushed a display case onto the stage. One of them pulled away the red velvet cloth covering it, and my gaze was instantly drawn to what lay beneath. It was a necklace adorned with various sizes of diamonds, and in the center hung an exceptionally pure blue sapphire of the sky. Two people pushed a display case onto the stage. One of them pulled away the red velvet cloth covering it, and my gaze was instantly drawn to what lay beneath. It was a necklace adorned with various sizes of diamonds, and in the center hung an exceptionally pure blue sapphire. It was huge. I stared at the necklace, tugging at Alexander's sleeve. "How many carats is that sapphire?" Alexander looked at me, a knowing smile on his face. "Do you like it?" I ignored his gaze and replied casually, "Of course. What girl could resist a gem?" The host continued. "The tier of the sky, starting bid of 10 million, with increments of 5 million. I could refuse that. What kind of condition is this? Spending tens of millions on a necklace to wear around my neck?" I twitched my mouth, thinking to myself, if I bought a similar design on Shopee, it would probably only cost around 520 million. A voice rang out beside me. I turned to look, and Alexander still hadn't lowered the bidding paddle he had just raised. I quickly tugged at his sleeve. "Are you crazy? Who hangs an entire house around their neck?" He frowned. "Didn't you like it? If you don't like it anymore, I won't bid." He smirked slightly. "No way. I like you." Before I could respond, another voice called out from a distance. 30 million. I followed the voice and, as expected, it was Adrian. I sighed in relief, about to tell Alexander to stop bidding, when that jerk was quicker. He raised his paddle again. 50 million. If there weren't so many people here, I would have kicked him for ruining my image of a refined lady. What a nuisance. The two men's eyes met, and I was left sitting there, heartbroken over the money. Adrian's gaze lingered on me for a moment before he smiled and shrugged. The battle was settled. The two men's eyes met, and I was left sitting there, heartbroken over the money. The auction concluded, followed by a cocktail party, presumably for the business folks to socialize. My task was simple. Maintain a distance of 1 meter from Alexander, smile at everyone, eat and drink politely, and then eat some more. Once everything was done, my stomach was full. Sitting in the car on the way home, all I wanted to do was sleep. After a long struggle, I finally got home, ready to shower and go to bed when Alexander suddenly stopped me. "Are you full?" I nodded. He nodded back, smiling. "Good. Then we should do some exercise to digest, so you won't think about those little fresh meats anymore." Alexander must definitely be a Capricorn, holding grudges like this. A sleepless night. After that day, Alexander returned to his busy schedule, and I didn't see him again, nor did he tell me where the necklace he spent an apartment's worth of money on had gone. I frowned, feeling a sudden, indescribable sense of loss. Although I didn't want to admit it, I really had started to like him. However, it was clear that Alexander hadn't bought that necklace for me. A wave of anxiety rose within me. Don't tell me that after that jerk has drained me, he'll go off liking someone else. I sighed heavily. Having lunch with Evelyn, hearing my sigh, the little boy hesitantly asked, "Aunt, what's wrong?" I looked at him with tear-filled eyes. "Evelyn, because Alexander helped you get into the painting class, you must treat me well from now on, okay? You absolutely cannot be ungrateful like Alexander." The little boy looked confused. "Auntie, what are you talking about?" I shook my head. "You're still too young. You wouldn't understand." He looked at me with a puzzled expression. In the evening, it was rare for Alexander to come home early. I curled up on the bed, listening to the sound of his clothes rustling as he changed, remaining silent. In this situation, I think pretending to sleep is still the safest way. "Stop acting." He gave my butt a light pat. I jumped up, feeling both wronged and defiant. "What gives you the right to hit my butt? I've never been hit by anyone before. How dare you hit me?" I wasn't sure why I felt so aggrieved. My chest tightened, and tears streamed down my face. Seeing me cry, he panicked. "Victoria, don't cry. It's my fault. I couldn't control myself. How about you hit me back?" I blinked, suddenly feeling a bit hopeful. "Really?" He twitched the corner of his mouth, sighed deeply. "Just say you'll go with me to a place." "I'm not going anywhere. It's too late for anyone to go out. Only a fool would go." He insisted on taking me out for something delicious. Alexander drove me to the riverside. In an instant, scenes from detective movies flashed through my mind, and an alarm went off in my heart. "Alexander, are you really planning to push me into the river?" The corner of his mouth twitched even more. He pointed towards the river bank and asked, "Are you allergic to romance?" Only then did I see a yacht hidden in the darkness. He took my hand and led me on board, each step making my heart race faster. On the yacht, he pulled out an apartment from Tang Then Not Fam. Oh no, the tier of the sky, and a diamond ring as big as a pigeon egg. Kneeling on one knee, his eyes filled with affection as he looked at me. "Before, because it was an arranged marriage, I poured all my energy into work and neglected you. But after spending some time together, I realized I couldn't help but be drawn to you. Even though we are now husband and wife, I still owe you a proper proposal. So, will you agree to be my wife? Beep. Mission accomplished. I was so moved that I could hardly contain myself, just about to nod in agreement when everything suddenly fell into silence. From the hazy atmosphere before me, a white light with wings suddenly appeared, fluttering towards me. Hello? I am System 9248. The campaign to conquer the domineering CEO, marry first, love later has been successfully completed. Congratulations, you can now return home. I was bewildered. What does this mean? You mean after all the trouble I went through to finally live a life with money and Alexander, you're now planning to send me back to a reality with nothing? I was bewildered. What does this mean? You mean after all the trouble I went through to finally live a life with money and Alexander, you're now planning to send me back to a reality with nothing? Oh, it quietly retorted. That's not what I meant. So what does that mean? I got even angrier. When I crossed into the book, where were you? Aren't you my system? Aren't you my golden hand? You only show up when Alexander is about to propose, and you don't even argue about it. Its voice got even smaller. That's because there was a bit of a problem. What problem? It chuckled awkwardly, weakly explaining. I got lost. My mood was in turmoil. Truly a useless system. Completely unreliable, I sighed, feeling a bit uncomfortable. So now you want to take me away, right? It flapped its wings, hurriedly saying, No, no, no. Please let me explain. Because you were pulled into this due to a glitch in our space management, plus Alexander adjusting the storyline back on track himself. You have the right to choose. Return to the real world or stay here. I stared at it for a few seconds, then pointed at myself and softly said, Do I look like someone easy to fool? Right now, I have money in Alexander. Why would I want to go back? The system smiled. All right then, but I must remind you that the author of this book hasn't finished writing it and has even abandoned it. So I can't help with the future development of the plot. I shot at a glare. What do I need you for? The system was left speechless, angrily saying, Do you believe I can take you out right now? I pretended to act cute, gently patting its wing. I was just joking. It was thrown off balance by my pat, struggling to regain stability, both angry and sulking. If you change your mind later, remember to find me. After all, Alexander completed the mission on his own, so I owe you a favor. If you want to leave, just call my code number 9248, and I'll take you out. I forced a smile. Thank you so much. Well then, I won't disturb your sweet proposal anymore. Goodbye. After saying that, it vanished into thin air. Everything returned to normal. Alexander knelt on one knee, looking at me with eyes full of affection, asking again, Victoria, will you be my wife? I smiled and nodded. I agree. He breathed a sigh of relief. I was really nervous just now. It felt like the few seconds waiting for your answer lasted a century. I chuckled softly. Of course. Time stood still earlier. I even had a long conversation with the system. It must have taken a lot of time. He laughed, his eyes crinkling. But I had already thought it through. Even if you didn't agree, we already have a marriage certificate, and when we get home, I'll tear it up. So you won't be able to divorce me, I calmly replied. The marriage certificate can be redone, don't you know? His face darkened. Victoria, I smiled at him, gently caressing. All right. It's my fault, Mr. Alexander. The future is long, and Mrs. Alexander has a long way to go. Extra Chapter 1. Later, I spoke with the system again. From its words, I learned that the book I crossed into and the one I had read before had the same author. I nodded. Finally, everything made sense. The author didn't want to come up with new character names, so they just reused names from the previous book, but then the views weren't high. So the author only wrote the prologue and abandoned it. The story contained too many elements for me to know where to start criticizing. As for Darmian, I had never asked before, but when I asked Alexander, I learned that the kid was the son of his brother and sister-in-law, and since they had a car accident, Alexander had raised him. There was no question of him being a love child. All the secrets were revealed. And finally, I got to enjoy a comfortable life, like a pig, eating and sleeping, taking Darmian out to play. But all the happiness vanished the moment I stepped on the scale and saw the number I had gained 3 kilograms. 3 kilograms. If it were before, I couldn't have gained 3 kilograms in a whole year. The worst part is that every night, Alexander dragged me to exercise. Why, despite my efforts, was I still gaining weight? I really can't understand this sudden weight gain. This unexpected weight gain feels like a warning bell. If I continue living this lazy lifestyle, I might soon become a wilted housewife, and then a young, innocent girl will catch Alexander's eye. After that, I'll be kicked out of the house. The more I think about it, the more scared I become. So I decide to start exercising to lose weight. I adopt an intermittent fasting regimen and work out every day. Sitting there watching Alexander and Guyu Kong have dinner, drooling to the point of almost spilling. At first, they even asked me if I wanted to join them, but now they pretend not to see me. These two dogs are really ruthless. I've cursed them 1,000 times in my heart, but because of my figure, I can only keep drinking water. However, when my weight still hasn't changed as I hoped, my body starts to undergo other changes. I begin to lose my appetite, and just the smell of food makes me feel nauseous. In the evening, I anxiously look at Alexander. Alexander, do you think it's because I'm on a diet that I've developed anorexia? No, I don't want to die yet. I haven't lived enough. Alexander pats my head, his warm, strong hand. What nonsense are you talking about? Listen, I'll take you to the hospital tomorrow. It'll definitely be fine. I blinked. Go to the hospital? Aren't you going to call your private doctor to come check on me at home? He paused, frowned, then flicked my forehead lightly with his finger, sulking. Stop reading those useless novels in the future. I huffed. Clearly, he's just a character in a book, yet he dares to say such things. The next morning, I go to the hospital. The doctor asks about my symptoms, then jots them down in my medical record and smiles. Based on your symptoms, we recommend that you register for a checkup at the obstetrics department. Extra Chapter 2. Victoria, went from a stunning young girl to a beautiful woman, and now I'm a future mother who's 2 months pregnant. I suddenly want to cry. Why is everyone else's life in a book so rich and interesting, while I have to jump 3 levels in a row? And now I'm about to become a mother. Someone save me. I really am not ready to be a mother. Looking at that dog, Alexander, ever since we left the hospital, he's been holding the ultrasound picture and grinning like a fool. The baby isn't even born yet, and he's already doting on it, as if he loves it so much. Suddenly, I feel uncomfortable and think about not wanting to keep this child anymore. Victoria, this is our first child. I'm really so happy. He looks at me with sparkling eyes, his eyes curving into a beautiful arc. Thank you, Victoria. I pursed my lips. Fine, I'll keep the baby. But not long after, I regretted it. I started experiencing morning sickness day and night, and just the smell of food made me vomit, causing me to lose weight quickly. Alexander was extremely worried. Victoria, you can't keep not eating and drinking like this. Is there anything you crave? I'll go buy it for you. I had just recovered from the nausea, and could only weakly wave my hand, unable to speak. One night, I suddenly slapped Alexander, who was sound asleep, my eyes red as I looked at him. Honey, I want to smell gasoline. Alexander. In the middle of the night, he drove me to the gas station, sitting on the roadside while I sniffed gasoline and ate 2 big bowls of rice, his gaze full of complexity. Extra Chapter 3. After 3 months of pregnancy, the time finally came to give birth. The baby was a boy, crying loudly and clearly. After looking at the baby, the sparkle in Alexander's eyes dimmed, and he sighed with regret. Why is it a boy? Me and Guyu Kong. Ellipsis. Although he seemed a bit dissatisfied, Alexander was still a devoted father. Almost all the baby care was done by him. The only thing I had to do was breastfeed, and the rest was just sleep. Victoria Vukang carefully poked the baby's cheek, his face full of excitement. Little brother, you have to grow up fast. A warm feeling surged in my heart, and just as I was about to express my thoughts, I heard the next line from the little guy. That way I can help you with some of your homework. Haha, look at these 2 people from the Victoria family. One is more scheming than the other. Alexander held the child, gently soothing him, then turned to me and whispered, Adrian, give him a name. It's hard to comfort him without one. I nodded. When my water broke, I was eating chocolate ice cream. So how about naming him Bat Kendong? which means unable to bear the cold. Alexander and Victoria Vukang. Question mark. Extra Chapter 4. At the same time, Alexander officially named his son Min Lam. While at home he was called Min Lam. Upon hearing the name, I immediately understood its meaning. Although I pretended to scoff at it, I felt quite happy inside. Min Lam was growing up, and Alexander was becoming more attached to me, complaining every day while hugging me. Wife, don't you think you've been too nice to Min Lam lately? I shot him a glare. Alexander, he's your son too. Am I not allowed to be good to your child? He rubbed his nose against my neck, making me feel ticklish, his voice still full of grievance. But I wish you could pay a bit more attention to me. After all, the little guy is growing up. How about we have another baby girl for him? I replied. He's only 3 years old. 3 years old is already big. Without saying another word, Alexander picked me up and threw me over his shoulder. I hurriedly struggled. What are you doing? The child is still here. I don't care. Who told her to compete with me for you? Alexander. How old are you to be fighting with a child? Keep fighting. Adrian covered Evelyn's eyes, shaking his head continuously. After we walked out of sight, the little boy said to Evelyn, who was blinking in confusion, not understanding what was happening. They're always like this. You have to learn to understand them. You need to grow up quickly. I'll teach you commercial law. Extra Story 5. Thanks to Alexander's day and night efforts, I successfully became pregnant with our second child. The ones who were happy, besides him and Adrian, also included my eldest son, who until now had not spoken a word, only following us around and smiling foolishly. Their joy was theirs. As Alexander wished, the second child was a girl. Alexander held the little girl in his arms, reluctant to let her go. After a while, he approached me, shyly saying, Wife, let's discuss this. About raising the child. This time can you be the strict one? Question mark. Many years later, Adrian led the 2 little ones playing in the yard, while I and Alexander sat on the balcony, watching the 3 children frolic, smiling at each other. He wrapped his arm around my shoulders, my head resting on his chest. Time passed so peacefully, serenely, and worry-free. Extra Story 6. Hello everyone, I am Victoria. I am 5 years old this year. Dad says we must cherish every year we are together, so he named me Victoria. Mom says I am her precious gem, so she gave me the nickname Darmian. However, this nickname is only used by Mom. Dad and my brother call me Victoria. Therefore, when I was little, I often didn't know how to respond when they called me. Dad spoils me a lot, but he spoils Mom even more. As soon as Mom sighs, Dad knows she wants watermelon or a smoothie. When I asked my brother Adrian and Evelyn, they just patted my head and sighed. You're still young. They're just like that. You'll get used to it. After that, I really did get used to it. Adrian looked at me seriously and said each word. Victoria, you need to grow up quickly. I'll teach you commercial law. Before he could finish his sentence, he was pushed by Evelyn. It's enough to harm just you. Do you want to harm Victoria too? No way. Later, both of them taught me together. I smiled. They say that girls with older brothers are often spoiled, but because I have Adrian and Evelyn, I became stronger like a boy. Dad sighed. This girl is hopeless. Then he turned to Mom and said, Now the government allows us to have 3 children. How about we? Mom didn't hesitate to kick Dad, bluntly saying, If you mention it again, I'll have you sterilized. Hearing that, I felt very sad. My dog, little Huang, had also been sterilized. Evelyn said, Little Huang has become a eunuch. I didn't want Dad to become a eunuch too. Even though I didn't understand what a eunuch was, I felt it wasn't a good thing. I found Adrian more reliable, so I asked him. He told me not to worry. Dad wouldn't be sterilized. They say women at 30 are like wolves and tigers. Mom definitely wouldn't do that. Moreover, back then, Mom had said the same thing, but not long after I was born. After hearing this, I felt much more at ease, but still didn't fully understand those words. So I decided to ask Dad for clarification. Dad, what does like wolves and tigers mean? As soon as I finished speaking, Dad and Mom spat out their watermelon juice. That night, Adrian was punished to stand upside down and had to memorize the first 3 chapters of civil law. Dad told me, Victoria, I don't expect much. I just hope that when you wear a dress, You can keep your legs closed. Can you see any girl in a dress sitting cross-legged like you? I sneakily glanced at Mom, who was sitting with her legs spread out on the sofa in a dress. Dad saw it too and immediately fell silent. Dad patted my head, his voice full of pity. And Yen, I just hope you could be like a princess. I nodded. I understand. A few days later, I gave Dad a gift. Dad was very surprised and moved. His eyes seemed to say that his daughter had grown up. But when I opened the gift, it was a Princess Elsa dress. I saw my father's face gradually turn pale, while my mother's face turned as red as pork liver. Adrian and Alexander were no different. I proudly rubbed my nose and said, Dad said he wanted to be a princess, and I used all my lucky money to buy this dress for you. Do you like it? Dad calmly looked at me. And Neen, do you misunderstand what I meant? I meant I wanted you to be the princess. Dad calmly looked at me. And Neen, do you misunderstand what I meant? I meant I wanted you to be the princess. Me? ? Extra Chapter 7. Time flew by so quickly. I hadn't even had a chance to enjoy anything before I suddenly became the mother of 2 children. Watching Bao Chao chase Min Lam around the house, I felt a bit of comfort. The little one perfectly inherited my athletic abilities. This made me very satisfied. I looked out the window, and a wave of sadness suddenly washed over me. Why had I become the mother of 2 children already? A pair of arms wrapped around my waist from behind, and Alexander rested his head on my shoulder, his warm breath tickling my neck. What are you doing, really? His lazy voice rang out. His voice made my heart race. But just then, a cold gust of wind blew by, snapping me back to reality. I immediately shot him a glare and pushed him away. He looked like a stray dog, his eyes glistening with tears, looking very pitiful. Wifey, why did you push me away? Don't you love me anymore? Exactly. It was this very look that made me fall for his traps every single time. I huffed coldly, placed my hands on my hips, and looked at him through my nose. Alexander, I'm done. I want to leave home. What? He was startled. No way. Wifey, what did I do wrong? I'll fix everything. Please don't go. Bao Chao and Min Lam were frightened by his voice and started crying. Not understanding what was happening, I angrily hit him twice to vent my frustration, then smiled dangerously. Let me calm the kids down first, and then I'll settle the score with you. Alexander immediately became serious. Leave all this to me. I can't trouble you. After saying that, he scooped up the 2 kids and ran away, as if his feet were coated in oil. I continued to look out the window, pondering about life. Finally, that night, Alexander and I had a meeting about my desire to leave home. He calmly analyzed. So that means you want some time for yourself? I nodded. All right, I agree. He nodded too. But, he continued, you can't look for fresh meat, and you must call me at least once a day to put my mind at ease. No fresh meat. I was astonished. Then what's the point of 80% of my personal time? He bared his teeth in a mock threat. I kissed the black card he handed me, packed my bags that night, and set off immediately, fearing that if I delayed even a second, he would change his mind. The moment I stepped out of the airport, I wanted to scream with joy, but fearing being seen as crazy, I decided to hold it in. Finally free, I checked into the presidential suite on the top floor of a 5-star hotel, holding a cup of coffee, but inside was bubble tea. The life of a wealthy lady is truly blissful. I lay back on the soft, plush mattress, unable to contain myself, reminiscing about the first time I met Alexander. But before I could dwell on it for long, I rolled over and fell into a deep sleep. Being single is so good. Maybe tomorrow I'll consider getting a divorce. The next day, I went to an amusement park, bought an ice cream, but found it wasn't tasty. Just as I was about to call Alexander to fix it, I suddenly remembered I was out having fun alone and I pouted. Just as I was about to call Alexander to fix it, I suddenly remembered I was out having fun alone and I pouted. Following the principle of not wasting food, I reluctantly finished the ice cream. I played freely for several days. Strangely, I missed Alexander even more. When I was about to pack my things to go home, the hotel doorbell suddenly rang. Peeking through the peephole, I was startled and quickly opened the door, happily pulling Alexander inside. What are you doing here? Alexander said nothing, pushed me against the door, and gave me a hot, lingering kiss. By the time both of us were out of breath, he leaned against me, his voice filled with frustration. You didn't call me, and I didn't dare to rush you. But I really miss you. I didn't know what to do with him, and I thought of the two little ones who had just finished their milk at home. You're here now, but what about the kids? Who's taking care of them? Alexander flashed a mysterious smile. Don't worry. Someone is looking after them. At the same time, Adrian looked at the two lively kids running around the house with an expression of utter boredom. He rolled his eyes a few times and signaled to the little ones. You two sit down and I'll tell you a story. The two believed him and obediently sat down. Adrian pulled out a book, cleared his throat, and began to read. Commercial Law. Chapter 1. I held my forehead in despair. Adrian was still so young. He was just a child. Don't underestimate the abilities of the heir of the Gua family. He will have to face much more in the future. Seeing that I had nothing to say, he leaned closer to me. Wife, say goodbye to your single life. Let me join you and the kids for some fun. I pretended to think for a while, and then reluctantly nodded in agreement. He pulled me into his arms. I couldn't help but exclaim, I don't know what good deed I did in my past life to meet you in this one. Who knows? Maybe we were destined to meet in a past life, he said, not believing it. Don't touch me everywhere. The sky was pitch black, the night was still long, and Alexander and I had a long way ahead of us. This is where the story ends. Thank you all for following along.